Hey everybody, welcome back to the Delineation. I think this is episode 16, but I think I'm totally wrong. It might
The
be 15.
Delineation is such a nice name, by the way.
I feel so lucky that I got that before anyone else did.
It sounds like a news station. Now the Delineation.
Well, my intro music is like, welcome to the Delineation with Cam White. And I kind of want to do some more like news style stuff with it, and I feel like that kind of name would be perfect. But anyway, welcome back to the Delineation. Today I have Mr. Wade Caves with me. I don't know if you guys know Wade Caves. I'll do my introduction, but I'd love you to have you do your own introduction. I met Wade at my first astrology conference, which was SOTA, which was the State of the Art of Astrology. That doesn't happen anymore. Whoa! Whoa! Okay. We already have some cataclysmic failures here. Okay, we should be good now. Anyway, as you guys can see, if you've been watching me for a while, I don't usually do in-person setups like this. This is my first time, but
it's cool though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There is the ISTAR Astrology Conference happening in Denver, so I'm kidnapping a few people while I have them to talk about astrology. So today I have Wade with me. Anyway, I met Wade at my first astrology conference. I love this guy. He actually was one of my teachers. He's a teacher for the STA. I took their horary class. I absolutely love it. And today I actually want to ask him a lot about horary. But anyway, hi, Wade.
Hey,
how are you?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
So I guess for my audience, a lot of my audience isn't necessarily going to be familiar with, I think, a lot of the inner workings of the like astrology world and the community, as well as even like horary and stuff like that. So give us a little bit of like your background and what you do and who you are.
What I do and who I am. So I started with psychological astrology, like I think a lot of us do, interested in our own birth charts of our friends. If we're being honest, the birth charts are the people that we want to date, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's the thing that you do when you're in your teens or early 20s. I think there was a time where I just kind of decided I either needed to let this go or be serious about it. So I enrolled in some formal education and did that all online, and then very quickly went to my first conference. I think a lot of people are doing that right now, though, you know, going to first conferences. NORWAC earlier this year, which is held in Seattle, over almost every Memorial Day weekend. Sometimes things change. Over half of the attendees were first-time conference goers, which was insane.
Really?
Yeah. So there's, I think these people are experiencing exactly what I experienced, which was just this, you know, deep passion to connect with other people who were talking about this idea that they're, you know, if all moments are connected, if all things are connected, is there any way that we can talk about that? Astrology offers a really comprehensive system to be able to analyze what it means for different moments in time to be connected, what the quality of the connection is, how stable it is, unstable, you know, is it productive, you know, is it whatever. But anyway, so, sorry.
No, I was going to say, well, that's something that you're talking about in one of your lectures, right? Like, like the connection and everything like that. And that's I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about all of the lectures that you're doing at this conference and kind of dive more into it. But what were you going to say?
Eventually, you know, I started studying, went to this conference, and then moved into horary. I found horary, which was able to do exactly what I felt like astrology should be capable of delivering. There was just an immediate recognition of, you know, this divinatory technique, feeling like I was just looking into the void and it was looking back, and it was just this, you know, mystery to me, and I felt really intently that I wanted to be around it, you know. So then started studying horary and teaching horary a few years after that. And yeah, it's been 10 years now. You know, I started in 2012. Wow. Studying. I wouldn't say that I was in a professional space until about 2014. But yeah, I mean, it's coming up on quite some time since I really entered into this, you know, kind of space, I guess.
Well, and now you're pretty much like, you know, what's really interesting about you is in terms of the astrology, we'll call it leadership for right now. It's a lot of old people, to be honest with you, and you're really one of
people
the
who are established, right? People who have been around for some time,
forever. And I mean, and for literally ever.
You remember that interview that was at Don Cheadle and Kevin Hart when Don Cheadle said his age, and then Kevin Hart said, "Damn."
Exactly.
Like, that's
well, and so what I always find really peculiar about you is, you know, you're always in the lineup with all of like the cronies. Like it's like old person, Wade, and then old person, and you have found yourself to be in a position of, you know, being a teacher, and I see you, you know, you're always speaking at conferences. You're doing a lot with the STA. What was your motivation, I guess, to get into this space, especially with horary? And also, too, if you don't mind, I would love to hear your definition of horary, because I don't think my audience is really familiar with what it is, but it's a huge part of astrology that really goes kind of unseen.
Yeah, you're very right about that, and it's not an accident that that happened. I mean, horary
Really?
has come, it's come in and out of vogue for most of its history. I mean, when we found, religion coming down on astrology, rationalists coming down on astrology, it was not the astrology you used for weather forecasting. It wasn't the astrology you used for figuring out what's going on with the harvest. It wasn't even the astrology you used for your own, bodily medicine, and that was all fine. Horary is where the questions of superstition, where freedom of will starts to come in, and so maybe now is the time to explain what horary is and why freedom of will would come into this. Horary is a method of using the positions of the planets in the sky at a given moment in time to explore a problem that somebody has that needs resolution. I mean, the idea is that this is something that has escaped, your grasp about how to solve. You've tried the common sense alternatives; none of them are working. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to go all the way down. I'm painting a bit of an extreme picture, but I guess it's to say that horary, most of astrology, it shouldn't be the first place you turn. You got to use your common sense first. But if you have a problem that you can't solve, you're struggling to get pregnant, you want to know what's going on. If you are struggling to get the promotion, want to know what's going on. You want to know, where your passport is because you got a flight tomorrow morning and you don't have time to not find it and stumble upon it, some weeks later. So if there's a real problem, I'd be hard pressed to find something that we couldn't put to astrology. But some lines of inquiry are so specific and they require such specific advice that turning to a nativity can be very difficult because we're talking about life in broad themes. So what we use with horary is the positions of the planets now to talk about the current energies that are in place, because we're using this core idea that all things are connected, which means that the moment that you chose to consult me about your problem, that moment itself is reflective and carries the symbolism of the problem that you have, because this is the conversation that we are having. So you pull up that chart, you apply principles that have been many thousands of years in the developing.
Yeah.
And
like it's like that's something that was really mind blowing about. So I, for those that don't know, I took the STA horary class. I really recommend it. As far as like courses, it was
fun having you on the course, because you were a bit of, he was a bit of the, the oddball that got thrown in. I mean, the answers on some of your submissions were so funny. I remember some of them. I mean, because you'd use every explicitive that you wanted to. If it was like on my mind to say, well, he looks fucking guilty.
He looks fucking guilty.
Like, okay, well, all right, well, there's a point. So.
Well, and something that I really stayed away from horary for a minute, just because I knew it would really question my beliefs. Because when you get down to it, and if when you see how horary works, you go, oh, this is astrology is actually something else going on. Like when you get into the deep natal chart stuff, you're like, this is crazy how advanced it is and how accurate. Then you get to horary, you're like, we're kind of playing with something here that's a little crazy.
Yeah, it's a bit, it is crazy. I can tell you a story that I recently had of an astrologer friend of mine who had lost her missing jewelry. She had gone abroad and she lost both parents when she went abroad. So what ended up happening is she had an extended removal from home. By the time that she came home, she had no idea where she had stored the jewelry. She'd had all sorts of people in her house while she was gone, looking after the house, taking care of it, any of the kind of things she would have needed done over the many months that she was gone. And she had no idea, was it stolen? Has she misplaced it? What was going on? And, we were
those
able
are
to...
real questions to ask in a moment like that, when you have like family members coming in on your house taking care of stuff like that.
Because those were family heirlooms, you understand. So like they were very important to her. They weren't just something she could have replaced at Claire's. This was a big deal. The upshot was that the symbolism showed that it was absolutely fine. It was exactly where she left it. It was around moving water near a wall, that it was at the bottom of something hidden, hard to see, somewhere near women's things, discreet, because the Virgin symbol was in there. Virgo was there.
Saturn stuff.
And it was, yes, and there was a very strong Venusian theme in this. And that also it should be in something that closes, so like a drawer, cabinet, something like this, moving water near. So that was the imagery that we provided, which, I don't know what that did for her, but she woke up the next morning and immediately knew. that it was in the lowest drawer, and as she opens it, she had her jewelry bag, but she wrapped it in her panties and stuff like that. So this is the women's unmentionables bit that comes with that Virgo symbolism, but that it played out, and it was in her bathroom, in between. It was up against a wall, in between, one room and the next, it was all captured in the symbolism. Now, there's no reason that I should have been able to find that. So when you get into these kind of circumstances, you do realize you're playing with something that is bigger than you'll ever figure out.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't want to enter the. I almost said that, no. But I thought go reverent with it and say that you might want to enter that temple. But there's a lot of things and that's missing jewelry, so that's easy. But what if we're now talking about something like, will I ever purchase the property? Will I ever be successful in my desire to purchase this bit of land that has been difficult for me? Or I want to know about this business deal. Is it possible that this merger will be successful? Will I come out in a better standing on the other side? And it's very easy when we start talking about these questions about what will happen, that we start entering into this field of what's fated versus where is our, and I'm fully on the side of free will. Now,
really?
And because it's just like this. I cannot change, for instance, that the moon is heading towards an opposition of Saturn. If it is, that's not something that I can do. But that doesn't mean that there's not a world of options within that. So I sometimes I talk about like playing a video game. Talking about fate and free will in a video game seems kind of silly. I mean, there's a storyline that must progress, but there's no dictation about whether you jump on this ledge once or get down and do it 80 times, move over here, go left, recircle. I mean, all these things are open to you, and you can be in that world in any way you want. I mean, it's a very maybe silly metaphor, but this is the same kind of like, there's an overarching maybe container of options and possibilities that exist. And the further we move down our life, certain possibilities start to close. I wouldn't be able, for instance, to enter some careers for you to be young. I'll never be a tennis player.
Yeah.
That's gone for me. But that doesn't mean that I didn't have freedom of will to be one. You get what I'm saying? So this is where I think with horary, we have to remember that we are working on resolving a problem. So my job as a horary astrologer is not to predict where it will go, although that may be part of what I have to say. It's more to help you become more attuned to the nature of your problem, its cause, and its likely path, to help you wake up to yourself so that you can get back in the driver's seat of your own life.
Well, and that's something I really like about horary, is the fact that it's like referred to as the art of asking questions. Because in my consultations all the time, I get people asking me, they're like, what should I be doing with my life? It's like, well, it's like, there's a lot of things you can do.
Listen, meaning is made, you got to make it where you find it. There's a lot of talk right now about astrology and helping find life purpose. And I promise you, your life purpose, astrology can be a mirror, and the thing is, whatever you stare at, sometimes you see it just magnified back, and it becomes something of an echo chamber. You have to find meaning in the real world, and the astrology can help you direct your energies, but it won't. The meaning is out here.
Yeah, well, and this is something too I talk about, is like, some people will look back at and be like, I'm in this negative situation and it's so bad, but that's only a matter of perspective and time. Like some people's worst, experiences end up being their best experiences in life later on, after reflection and, things change.
Well, and there absolutely are ways with horary astrology to determine, is this a one-off bad misfortune? I'm sorry, you just drew the bad lot this time. Is it that? Are we dealing with a recursive issue in the self, that is continually being repeated? Is this a patterned kind of behavior? Is it something that has long duration, short duration? Is it iterative? Those are things we can do with astrology to start to dissect where a problem is, and that helps a lot to be able to determine how deep does this consultation need to go. Somebody comes to you, for instance, about a missing wedding ring, and it's very easy for me to say, well, I'll help you locate your missing wedding ring, but maybe it helps to slow down and ask, why did the symbol of your marriage leave you?
Ooh.
What is there something going on in your marriage? Are you, struggling with something here? Is your own commitment to this union starting to falter?
It's kind of like omen-based reading almost.
Well, and that is,
what it is.
Yeah. We're witches, man. That's it's kind of how it feels.
Well, so something that I think I got the most out of horary, and this is what attracted me the most, was how technical it is. I mean, the craziest part about the STA was just how much, I mean, the minutes matter, the degrees matter, what part of the zodiac sign, like faces and the ascendant. Oh my God, that has been mind blowing.
Yeah, but you know what the thing is? Like, I look at an economist and I look at a baker, and we would say the same thing to both of them. Their jobs are highly technical, but once you know the rules and you know the field, you know the system, you can be in, living kind of breath with it. When when you're in that kind of relationship with it, that's where creativity really begins.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's like, I don't know. I guess I just get what I get out of horary too is this sense of like, astrology, you have all these tools, you have all the things that you can do with it, but they don't really, it's about how you apply the tools, right?
Yeah.
And I find like the specifics of it so, I guess, insane. I guess my next question for you is like, what is your favorite way of using horary in terms of, because it's such a different practice in terms of like even discipline than just natal chart readings, right? Because you were just telling me before about, what's the lecture you said that you're doing on elections and the chart of the moment?
Yeah, so that was a separate one, but there's one that I was doing on consultation charts and the way that I work with nativities. We have birth charts that last us our entire lives, and there are many different techniques. I mean, you're never, as an astrologer, going to be in a shortage of options, of who to listen to about what to do. But I find a lot of these yield pennies, and when they hit, it feels amazing. But what I also know about human conditioning is when we sometimes hit the mark, that is more addicting than hitting it every time, So there's sometimes a real desire to force techniques to produce something. I was in that camp for a long time. I accepted all the traditional wisdom that came down from me on people who were telling me what traditional astrology was, what techniques we use, and I have got to tell you, thousands of charts later, that was all like just detail. There's something so much more immediate and present that can happen. So we got a birth chart, for instance. And I can give an example. And the example, this is going to come out later, so I can share this. But I was developing a technique for being able to do group consultation. So this is part of where this came from. I mean, I'd experimented with it 10 years ago, and then here and there experimented with it. It was always with me, but I'd never really made it a cornerstone of my practice. Then I got invited to do for a bridal shower to show up and be the court astrologer, and talk with all the women who were in the bridal party and give astrological consultations. But, my techniques are very much moment based. And so how can I use one chart to talk to 7 women about what's going on in their lives?
Oh, I'm sure that had to shown up in the chart.
So the thing is, I realized that what I can do is I can reset the clock, because the degrees will move on average. It will progress 1 degree for every 4 minutes on average, the chart will. So if I'm speaking to somebody for 20 minutes, it's 5 degrees of motion. That's enough for a planet to come on an angle and off an angle and for there to be slight variation.
Yeah.
But the other side of this is I realized, but if I put their birth chart behind it and I center the moment and put the birth chart behind it, what would happen? I had the first gal come up, and here's exactly what happened. The horary chart, the consultation chart at the time that, I was at this bridal shower, it's all through Zoom, so I wasn't anywhere. I was drinking at home. We all had wine together while we were doing it. But I was, her natal moon, so the transiting moon was in Scorpio, and it was exactly on the descendant, conjunct Venus in Scorpio. Then
fun for a wedding.
A lot of bridal party. Oh my God, I know, and that's a whole other. So then, when I put her birth chart behind it, though, suddenly the moon, her natal moon, was the degree of the midheaven. It was only a degree off. So now I've got the moon in real time is setting, and your birth moon is actually culminating right above me in my location right now. So I know there's a lunar theme. And then I also see Venus involved with the moon on the angle. So I look to see where her natal Venus fell. And it was on the transiting 5th house cusp in my location. Okay, so the time that I opened up the consultation chart, the 5th house cusp, her Venus was right on it. So I wrote down in my book, I think she's going to ask me about pregnancy. I think this is, because it's moon, mother, Venus, womb, this is the thing.
5th house stuff.
Yeah, but, Venus was in Scorpio and natal Venus was in Leo, and the images were painting something of some strain. And so, that opened up a conversation that I think was productive about methods of, consent. Anyway, so we move to the next person. And by this time, so we start with early Taurus on the ascendant. By this time, 26 degrees of Taurus is now on the ascendant.
Oh,
and
that's
the consultation chart, which is where
the fun star is.
Yeah.
The star of fun and happiness.
Yeah,
and enjoyment.
Medusa. Yeah, the Gorgon's head, Caput Algol. So that one is associated with a lot of mythology connected to beheadings, but as a result, it's also connected to things around the neck. Well, the individual who came forward to me was the only one who was adorned around the neck. She had her entire neck closed off. She had this scarf around her that was tied around, and everybody else, as soon as she came forward, I saw Algo, saw that on her neck. And I asked her to move aside so I could look at all the other people behind, because it was in the Zoom room. So I'm just like looking, no one else, not even a necklace, not anyone in that room. She's the only one. And I thought, well, this is insane. Her natal sun was in the ascendant. Now at this time, transiting Saturn in Aquarius is right on the midheaven. Okay, what's getting close to the midheaven? So this is looking to me now that it's becoming a 10th house, first house story, Sun, Saturn. When I think about Saturn in the midheaven and the Sun in the ascendant, I think career issues. And because it's Saturn that's higher up, that there's a block. And so when I asked her about this, she was very happy at her work, but yes, she had just transitioned, and that's the only thing she wanted to talk to me about. She said her life is pretty good, but she'd moved into a new team, and everybody above her was older. They'd been there, industry people, okay? Yeah. And that she just had no, way to kind of open up, because the sun's on the ascendant. She's trying to be born. She's trying to move over the horizon, right? This is the image that's being invoked, but it hadn't ascended yet, so there's this push against this authority. So we were able to work with the symbolism there. Next person who comes through, now Saturn is exactly on the midheaven, okay? It's like bang there. And this person's natal moon was actually conjunct Saturn, and it was right on the descendant, degree for degree. So transiting Saturn on the midheaven, her natal Saturn,
Can I guess what she came to you with?
Yeah.
Why am I single?
You're on the right track. Opposite direction. She was actually escaping a very abusive relationship at the time. She
stuck in a relationship.
Well, it turned out, she was married. It had turned abusive very recently before the wedding. She decided she wanted a divorce, and was actually at that moment at the bridal shower, he was trying to find her.
This is so Venus and Scorpio stuff too.
It's all, so the thing was, all of these different moments, I had nothing to do with connecting any of this. They brought their charts forward, and we connected when the time was right. And I just realized I don't have to stress about all these other techniques. If I'm present, my heart is with you. I know my system and I know my technique. We can talk, And so that was the moment that I realized that this was going to be an amazing system. So what I did is I offered natal consultations for the first time. I'd always done them. I never advertised for them. So I sent to my mailing list that I was going to do natal consultations. I thought maybe 6 people would message, and I thought that'd be great. We'll get it started and see how it feels. I hadn't closed my calendar, and it was all self-auto booking, and I ended up with somewhere between 6 to 8 consultations per day for 8 weeks.
God, are they hours? 1 hour?
Yeah, they were all an hour long.
Wow, so you'll do 6 in a day?
They signed up. You have to understand, I published that newsletter at a time that was like astrologically good for me. And I was a town away looking at a house I was hoping to buy. So I didn't know that all these people were booking because I didn't even know it had gone. I was somewhere else. My brain was somewhere else. And I came back and a little bit excited because it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that there was this much demand out there. But what this meant for my career, for 8 weeks, I was 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. No, but listen, I know it's exhausting, and I don't know if I want to do it again, but I was watching that astrology change minute for minute, and I realized that there was no question anybody could bring me that came at that time that didn't feel like, I spoke to 4 people about this earlier. Listen, I know, and the gap between what I needed to understand and what you were coming to me with, it got so much shorter. Wow. So actually, it was exhausting, but the work became so much easier because the stories are so united in theme. And maybe not in the expression, the form that it takes, but, the underlying current. So that was an amazing... So I'm giving a presentation about that technique, some early origins for it. Evangeline Adams had mentioned it, and a version of it in her work.
Well, that's kind of interesting. I have this, but she's one of the I can't believe there's not
she's a badass.
She's a badass.
She's a badass.
I just can't believe there's not a drunk history episode about her,
Yo.
or a there was literally an astrologer woman like predicting fires and being a badass in New York.
Fires, and you know about the court case that she was in.
Yeah, and I like if I could.
Does your audience know? Can I tell the story?
Yes, please tell about Evangeline Adams.
Yeah,
they don't know.
So she, she said she was descended from the President Adams. So she was like America's royal family. But she set up work in a hotel in New York, and she was fantastic. I mean, she would have people come through her door, 20 or 40-minute consultations, and beautiful style. When it hit that timer, she hit the button and you're out and the next one's in. And what was happening was she had a whole team of secretaries doing all of the math to do the chart work, because everything's by hand at this time. But she had a revolving door of people, socialites, people from all classes that would come through. There was a case that got brought against her that she was she was transgressing against fortune-telling laws. Now, this had also happened, to many people who have practiced in our art, and many of them, there's two paths you take.
The entertainer route or
you stand up or you cave. And Evangeline Adams was an example of somebody who she accepted the court summons. She went in and she said, yes, I do give predictions, and I'm quite good at it. And then she said, and I don't mind demonstrating for the court right now. So she was given an anonymous birth chart, and she was told to use her method of predicting. Now, she would have used the birth chart, and then I can almost guarantee you she would have used the astrology of the moment of these things overlaid to work to a place where she could get some guidance on what was really needing to be said in that moment to prove her point. And what she said was, I see a tragic death, a very early death, a watery grave. She said very little. Then the judge starts shuffling a bit. Turns out that this chart was the birth chart of the judge's son, who had only just died from a drowning accident. And she had just sat with no knowledge about what was going on. And the judge said, it has to be connected to me because I know I'm impartial and I have no, dog in this fight. The judge published his decision to say that she raised astrology to the dignity of an exact science. And it hit headlines everywhere.
Well, so this is, my audience knows I am on team astrology is a science, and fuck you for thinking that it's anything but that.
Yeah.
Because when you get down to, this is horary is a science. It's so fucking technical, and if you
and it's so mystical too. I want to make sure it is science, but it's also it is art.
Well, I like to put in the science as the definition of having a hypothesis, practicing it, getting a result, and then changing it from there. The scientific method.
Working with it, yes.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly, because the scientific method is not the domain of science. Science as we know it, biology, whatever, they use the scientific method. The scientific method is available to us in our spiritual journeys as well, because it is purely about exactly what you've said: hypothesis, observation, testing, challenge, conclusion.
And
what else do you?
My argument too is astrology is one of the oldest sciences. What other practices have thousands of years of text of people in different languages and continents?
And if that surprises anybody, the difference between, you have to remember that if you don't have calendars, you got to make them. You need to know when you're harvesting something, and there are patterns that you can see in the sky. It doesn't take long before people start putting two and two together and say, we should start tracking this shit. We should pay attention to what's going on and how our land changes when we see these kind of configurations happening in the sky. It was never, seen as a superstitious thing. It felt obvious. If you could see the patterns forming. So then what you get is thousands of years of people continuing to develop on this basic premise that if it's there, there's potential for meaning in it. And that's all that ancient astrologers did, was they didn't assume that it was devoid of meaning. That's where we are now,
Well, that's the whole scientific worldview that we're in now, and that's what Regiomontanus pretty much goes into in Cosmos and Psyche.
Oh yeah, I haven't read that yet.
I've only read the first 10 pages, but that's
what if he knew that I hadn't read it either, because I so respect Regiomontanus, and I should have read it many times over.
I want to finish it. I've only read the first 10 pages, but it's not my fault. It's the paper's as thin as Bible paper, and it's this text is just as tiny too. It's just so big. But yeah, that's what he really opens up with, is the whole, we have this really modern scientific worldview, and when we figured out the universe and that we're not the center of it, it took out the magic and everything and the meaning and everything.
And that's such bullshit, because we had many models that suggested that we weren't at the center of the universe. I was just reading something on my plane ride into Denver about the life of Al-Biruni, who was one of astrology's greatest minds, and he was living in the Islamic Golden Era in the 10th and 11th century. He was born in what is modern-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan area. And he was incredible. By the time that he was in his early 20s, he had fully created a chronology of the lineage of kings of the dynasties that were all around him. That he found a way to take what was going on in this corner of the world and this corner of the world and explain how their accounts of world history might be different and try to reconcile that. It's only modern researchers can only make sense of certain lands like the Sogdian calendar and things that were going on in their texts purely because of what Al-Biruni wrote. So he's moving through all this area in the Islamic lands. He's moving into India, intentionally going into India, writing about, he's one of the few authors at that time who were talking about India with respect. He's going there and seeing that the Indian astrologers are accomplishing amazing things.
Yeah, they're on a whole other planet at that point.
Amazing things, yes, and he's coming back, professing their wisdom. He considered people like MashaAllah Indian. He's like the
wow,
really?
Yes, that's a take.
Yes,
that's a very hot take.
Exactly. So he, but he, he was a very smart man, and he had referenced heliocentric models, and he said very clearly that I can absolutely see and understand that there is an argument to be made here, but there wasn't really enough political interest or in switching models at that stage. Maybe not enough data collected either, but even Al-Biruni's like, well, a lot of this stuff makes a lot more sense if you just switch.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing I always notice with astrology. It's like at some point you have to go, well, clearly we're not, because why is Venus doing that? Why is Mercury doing that, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any sense. But I mean, that didn't really come around until like, the church and, because I mean, that's what Regiomontanus talks about too in his book is like, the church really kind of like held back that information getting out a lot. But that's, of course, we're talking 800, 900 years after Al-Biruni at that point.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, so you're doing also a lecture on world events.
Yeah.
Let's get political. Well, I'm curious about as far as like, because I mean, you're also one of the only other astrologers that I know of that are at least like into geopolitics and all of these trending things. What is it?
Trending things.
Trending things, yeah. Whatever's trending on Twitter. Well, I guess
bless.
like so what are you really paying attention to in that? Because I talk a lot about the current events and world stuff on my podcast, and I'm more curious, what are you paying attention to? And you said that you're using like full moon and new moon techniques. What are you really looking at, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. So mundane astrology for me is, it's the pinnacle of all the other techniques kind of brought together. It's where we see how free will moves among the masses. There's a very big, kind of playing field there in terms of what can be explored. I mean, everything from, the astrology of art, because, when we talk about mundane astrology, it could be what the hell ever. I mean, if you have an interest in the history of teachers' unions, great, you're a mundane astrologer. Like, if it's about world history and, connecting in with human experience and times past and where, those kind of lines might be moving and directed toward the future, then, we're having the same conversation, maybe on different topics. I tend to right now focus on events that grab me, that just pull me, mostly because it is a balance of time. I have a very busy consulting practice. I teach, and so I don't have all that. Actually, see, I have plenty of time, but I also like to relax, so there's a little bit of that too. But so things that I've been working on recently, I mean, last year there was a lot that happened last year. I mean, everything connected to the insurrection on the 6th of January. There was the death of the Haitian president in 2021, also in the summer, if you remember Jovenel Moise.
God, I vaguely remember that.
Okay, so that was, something. Brexit, elections in general are of interest. The whole Roe v. Wade thing that, has been really at the center of many American conversations right now as we head into the midterms. The kind of thing that I look at is I look at how is it being discussed, and what's the language that we're using. But then also let's take a look at not just the astrology of the moment, but how it connects in with the broad public imagination. So this is where the new and full moon charts come from. So this idea about the moon is we're talking about masses now. Whenever we deal with these things, these are global, regional kind of things that happen. A new moon will affect a whole region. We're all looking at it together. We're seeing this together. So when you can take a look at a new or full moon that happens just before an event of note, you can get a sense about the context that this event was more or less, this new or full moon played midwife to that. It's almost like a magnet. It draws events that are like its structure to it. So you can always, if it's real and it really had impact and it was big, and you're never gonna fail to find meaningful connections between. And what that means is that we can use that productively into the future. I hope one day to be able to work with people who want to really do make really positive change in the world. And there are ways that just certain issues respond well to some astrological signatures, and they receive a lot of backlash on others. And
what do you mean?
Okay, so like imagine for a moment that we have, what would be a good example? I mean, I'm going to have to come up with something hypothetical, but imagine, for instance, that you're trying to work with a local union on, figuring out negotiations or something, or figuring, I don't know. But if you explore the history of that union, you will begin to realize that when things maybe work well for this group of people, there will be certain configurations in play. And when we see repeats of these configurations, things go well. And the reason is, if you track it all the way back, an early signature lied well on that. It might be that was the midheaven degree and the IC degree of when this took place. And so that's your elevation point, or maybe it's on the sun or the moon of some inception moment or something really starting. But troubles may come when you've got hard aspects to that. But if you don't know what the signatures that a group of people respond to, it can be very difficult. So, yeah.
Well, so here's a question. So this is regarding current events and lunations. This eclipse that we have on the midterms.
Oh,
in terms of
and that's the same. So this was another. So it is on YouTube. It's out there. I did a video on Roe versus Wade. I demonstrated how I used the lunations prior to the original arguing of that case. Norma McCorvey, who was Jane Roe, and her birth chart, how that plugs into all of this, the initial decision, and then the astrology of when it has been challenged, because this isn't
Venus
the first.
retrogrades in Capricorn.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, yes, and there's a very strong Mars signature and things that happen in the water signs, because we're talking about fertility issues and we're talking about things related to, and it wasn't an assumption I made. I didn't walk in there looking for water signs. They made themselves known. So using that technique, we know there was a leak, right? And that came on the back of an eclipse in Taurus. So there was a solar eclipse in Taurus that, when centered on DC, happened on the 9th house cusp. If you look at the Aries ingress this year, okay, it was Venus in Aquarius right between Mars and Saturn on the 9th house. So many of us said, this is an attack. This whole issue is going to be, in this, my opinion, my take, this is an attack on women's autonomy and, reproductive rights. And that's what the astrology appears to be pointing to for me. And when I, take a look at what's happening on election day, that same eclipse, it was a solar eclipse then. It's a lunar eclipse this time. The sun is in Scorpio, but the moon's in that same degree on that same very morning. And we're already getting results coming back about, the early, primaries and special elections that are held in advance of what goes on in November, that the Roe versus Wade issue has shifted party lines more than was anticipated. So, these are the things that I look for. I'm not saying that I'm marking what should happen. I don't want to be prescriptive about it, but I look for.
Well, I guess my question with it, because this is what's so captivating to me about this midterm election, is there is, the Roe v. Wade thing has really shifted a lot of stuff. But same thing with the vaccines and all of the and the recession and everything. Like, this is probably the most both partisan and also mixed opinions that everyone has.
Well,
and what I'm curious about with this election is the fact that it's a Mercury Cazimi opposite Uranus eclipse on Uranus. Is this that moment where, when I'm looking at this, is part of me just feels like all trust in elections is going to kind of get fallen out, because I think both parties are really going to go, what they've been doing, we won. But I guess when you say,
and that's actually happening globally right now.
Yes. Well, in my opinion, the age of technology and computers, it's going to be really easy to just mimic and do whatever. But my kind of question is, if you're looking at this from a perspective of how can we help this? How can we navigate this? When you see that, how does that change your, attitude as far as that event? Because in my opinion, I look at it as it's going to be very upsetting, and I'm not sure how to read it, because in my opinion, I think the Republicans will probably take over the House. I don't know who's going to take over the Senate. I think the Senate is going to be a different story. But I just don't know how it's.
I think most of the models agree with you, though. I think most of the models that are out there right now are showing greater odds that the Republicans will take the House and Senate will stay in the control of the Democrats. So that seems to track. That doesn't feel too off base. But I think when, you kind of take a look at this, the techniques that I use, it would be a lot more. I would look at each race individually. If I really wanted to do this, I would be doing it state by state. I have played with the idea of sitting down, locking myself in for a week, and just mapping out and just slowly, quietly, because you have to also understand, I've been working with Horary for nearly 10 years now. So I feel 8, don't let me lie. But, I'm confident in that. Mundane astrology it's a muscle that's new for me to flex, and I am still working on my system. So I'm not trying to be, loud and out there, but I have been exceedingly proud of the results that have come through, and, feeling, a really good sense of confirmation, back from the astrology of, where the lines are and where they aren't. But it requires a lot of time and investment and microscopic. It's the same thing with the birth chart, right? So when I was talking about that, using a consultation chart and then a birth chart behind it, it's like, using binoculars. The small lens comes first. We look at the moment to allow a zoom into a bigger thing, which actually allows us to see this thing clearly. And so if you want to take a look at what's going on with the election, I don't see how you do that without doing exactly what the economist's doing, exactly what the statistician's doing, and go straight to the actual ground where that election is happening. So you would need to be working with election charts based on if you're taking a look at something in a particular state, the capital of that state, not in the U.S. Because usually when you work with these kind of charts, ingresses, lunations, you centered on the nation's capital, but these kind of things require state,
which is a little bit more complicated.
More complicated, and then you got other questions. It's not going to make a huge difference for most states, but you might also want to consider if it's more of a regional district thing. Do we talk about the district and the 2 individuals who are running it? I don't have answers to that, but it's one of those things that it's a slow build toward the system. So I'm also trying not to take too broad of a predictive stance forward, because I'm still testing my strength on getting right what I know has already happened. If you get what I'm saying.
I feel you there, because making predictions is, especially with the mundane and the election stuff, gets very tricky, and a lot of reputability gets on the line there.
Yeah.
And it's
we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, of
I
course.
want to say, first of all, it's a very annoying thing when mundane astrologers come out to talk about, and they never stop about talking about how right they were about this one thing, and they called it right, and blah blah blah. So
I will say, I have to flex. I've been flexing the fact that I called the Fed raising interest rates in March and August of 2021. So I feel pretty.
See, you're obnoxious.
Exactly. I'm out of control.
No. But the thing is, but you saw it. Do you see what I mean? It's one of those things where there is, you should have, not every astrologer is going to see what you're seeing. And if you see something and you can say something and you've got a track record of moving in a particular direction. But I also want to say, Nate Silver's whole team called 2016 wrong. They're still issuing predictions.
Silver?
Yeah, 538.
538.
Wow,
I feel dumb right now that I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't feel dumb at all. He's an interesting dude. He was publishing. I didn't realize that I was kind of following.
Familiar.
Yeah, so he started developing statistical models to predict outcomes of things, and he did it and published all these things on a forum. He did so privately, without his name or trying to get much publicity, but he wanted some accountability, so he said what he thought would happen. Rectified his system, got it to a place of significant reliability, and took it live and created 538. I hope Nate got your story right.
538. Okay, I feel like something's coming to me with this.
Yeah, the little fox.
Yes.
Yeah. So at any rate, economists get it wrong. Statisticians get it wrong, because the fact is we've never seen this exact combination of factors before. We have to make astrological decisions based on what we know what's happening in the real world, plus what happened the last time we saw these signatures. But if anything changes, life doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Well, and that's something too that is really interesting that you bring up, because in horary, something I loved about the STA horary class was if you don't got the right information, you ain't gonna be able to answer the question. And sometimes you have to the chart will show you what the actual question is that they might be hiding, and you have to gather that information to actually make a correct delineation.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and you've got to be in a place where you're both talking truth, because otherwise, what are you doing?
Well, that's something I find really fun about doing readings is I often get to bring up stuff that people are often either uncomfortable about talking about, or they didn't necessarily come into the reading wanting to talk about. But I look at the chart, I'm like, this is what's on your mind right now.
So my mentor Deborah Holding, who the
shout
truth
out
is
Deborah
that,
Holding.
Yeah,
she's amazing.
She is amazing. And there's a couple things that I've already said where I'm kind of borrowing from metaphors that I'm certain I probably learned or heard from her first. But she had made this point. What was the thing you had just said? Remind me.
Something about
God.
Oh, I was just talking about horary and people not telling you like the full truth and gathering all the information, and the chart will show you.
Yeah, and you need to be able to recognize the truth. Otherwise, what are you doing? There was something I was going to say, but
well, like just like a client doesn't have to tell you everything. Like they might say they have a question, but then you look at their chart and you're like, I feel like something else is going on here.
Yeah.
When like I get that a lot for like relationships and living situation stuff. Where
Oh, I remember what it was. So let me say it now before I forget. She was kind of telling the story about how clients come to you and you're an astrologer. You're not a therapist.
I fucking love saying that to people.
And the thing is, they don't know what the conversation's going to turn into. But the truth is, sometimes they're not going to a therapist because they're not ready to open up to a therapist. But they're astrology sometimes allows a moment of just, I was off guard, didn't expect it, but we connected. There's a human heart thing.
Well, so, I mean, my followers know this, and this is something I'm going to be doing more and more about on my delineation, is like, I'm not necessarily anti-therapy, but it's prescribed for everything when it's not necessarily useful for all situations. And talking to someone about your chart is like, you can read my chart and you can know everything that's ever happened to me without me ever having to even mention it. And so there's this level of, what I don't want to say secrecy, but like this level of like, hey, I can acknowledge something by changing the way that I phrase things, by going around a certain subject or a certain topic with a certain way, and that can validate your experiences without you ever having to talk about it. And I can, for example, like I've had clients where it's like they have relationship issues or they have this issue going on that they don't really necessarily feel comfortable talking about, and I can walk around that and say, hey, I can acknowledge this for you and give you some insight without you even having to break the ice on it, because it's not something that you're even ready to talk about.
And the thing is, now I'm pro therapy, but I also, and I think, everybody should go for it all the time. But what I also think is you got to go with some intention. It's the same thing. You can't go to anybody without a point that you want. What are you trying to get out of this thing that we're doing here? And if you can define that for me, and it doesn't mean that you have to tell me what you want to talk about, but there's got to be a mission. If you're not actually drawing your arrow back, trying to hit a target. Our jobs in, systems like therapy, counseling, any kind of situation where we are helping somebody gain a better understanding of their problem. Astrologers maybe are not counselors or therapists, but in our own domain, we work with experiential realities, and so it's similar.
Well, and we have to hold that space.
You do have to, and you get nowhere if the other person doesn't know what they want to get out of that kind of moment.
Well, I don't necessarily, I wouldn't say I would challenge that. I guess like for me, there's, and this is just kind of my own style, because every astrologer is different, which is I think one of the more funner parts. But like the way I like to go about things is like, people usually come in their head like something they want to talk about, but then I just talk about whatever the astrology says.
Oh,
like,
I see.
Like you might have this, and we're going to cover it because it'll come up because it's astrology, and that's usually how it works. But it's like there's, like some people might want to know about this part of their life, but it's like they have all this career stuff, so I want to talk about this, and it'll fill in kind of the gaps for everything. It's well, and again, like I have a lot of varying opinions about therapy. I just look at it as like astrology is just this really insane tool to where you're holding that space. I mean, like I've been trained in some like therapy type settings, like what is it called when it's like crisis like handling, when someone's like losing it, and I think all of that's really, really important. But I find this magic in astrology of just being able to like receive the guidance that you need without necessarily having to have a target.
But see, that's what I'm talking about. You have to also, as there's two people who are involved here. So you as the astrologer, you're coming with the intent to communicate a message. But if you are approaching the oracle, the intent needs to be to hear. There's got to be some conversation that's kind of moving there. So that I think that's kind of what I meant more about the idea of like, it doesn't mean that we're going to talk about what we thought we were going to talk about today, but you came with the intent of receiving, communicating something, being in conversation with something, and there's somewhere that we can build on.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting being an astrologer is in that moment. Like oftentimes, when I was first starting off with consultations, it was like it wasn't necessarily a challenge, but the more.
Did you do them live when you first started, or did you do Zoom, or did you do?
When I first started, I wrote like 4-page essays for like $20 or something, and it took me like a week to do, and I made like 50 cents an hour. But then it turned into Zoom, and now it's
we're
just
going up, Jay.
Yeah, right. So it's just Zoom readings now. But there would be times where I would see the person, make my own biased judgments about them because I'm a human being, and I would have an expectation about them or about their life, and then it would differentiate of what the chart would say, and I would have this issue of like, like the chart says this, but I don't really believe it of them, and I would have these issues with consultations where, was it resonating, or I felt uncomfortable, versus now, like, I don't even, like, you can walk up to me, I don't care who you are, what you look like, what's going on, I just read the chart, and I trust the chart, and if I just lean into that, of like, this is just what the chart's saying, straight up, like, there's, like, regardless of what you say, I find that there's so much more power in that, because it really unlocks people, too,
and you'll find, too, so how long have you been consulting?
I've been doing consultations now for fucking 5-6 years now.
And, there's constant reiterative, like, new relationships we build with our own systems and our own techniques. And so the thing is, you and I are on a podcast being, very strong-worded about how we, do our shit. And then 10 years from now, we might look back and go, what the?
Well, that's something, too. And I would actually love to hear your opinion on this, because something that I'm really working with right now is I've been doing this since I was about 18. So 19. I've been really putting myself out there online, and I'm really starting to get to this point of like, there's things where I can look back and be like, wow, I was really immature and childish about that. And I'm a developing human, I'm growing, and I'm looking to, take those kind of leadership positions. But it's so crazy to look back at like doing it, because you started this when you were really young. I guess I would be really curious to know about your process of like being young and doing your astrology and thinking know it all. And I mean, like, that's the hardest part about Twitter.
Let me tell you, I have a Leo midheaven. I'm insufferable. I used to be really, really just absolutely insufferable, and I think I'm only marginally improved. The thing that's been kind of weird and tough is recognizing. I think I might have been a bit of a late bloomer. I was blind to myself. I was very self-aware about some things, and I wasn't about other things. When I would first start, I remember the very first lecture I gave was for a meetup. It was like very informal, but I didn't know what I was talking about. Can I tell you exactly what I did? I'll be very honest with you. I opened up Vivian Robson's Electional Astrology, and I summarized the main points that I took out of it, and then I just regurgitated it back. Now, had I been doing electional astrology at that stage, the answer is not really. I've done maybe one or two things for myself with absolutely no reason to believe that I improved my outcome. So it was really just kind of me probably testing the waters in this. I know that my natural inclination is to teach. I love teaching. That teaching and connecting are my skills. Those are the things that I think that I'm.
Where's your Venus?
Decent. Pisces.
The connector. And what's going on in what's your ninth house? Cancer.
Yeah, Cancer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anything there? Where's your moon?
Well, the moon's in the 10th in Virgo.
Oh yeah, your moon. No, Virgo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So here's.
No. I knew it. B. Eject. Where's the eject button?
Okay. So this is the only thing I want to ask. What house system do you use and why?
Okay, I can answer that. I use Regiomontanus. I believe that
it's Regiomontanus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry.
Why?
I just say Regiomontanus. I don't know.
Yeah, Regiomontanus. Yeah, that's probably closer to
Montanus.
Regiomontanus. I mean, who knows?
And I use that for horary because that's just how being taught that way. I'm like, that's just what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
But without going into the other opinions, my biggest question is
hide behind the microphone.
Well, I think this is really important because I mean I still use whole sign houses, and I like to say I'm not in a committed relationship with one house system. It's a very arbitrary thing in general.
You're open. Great.
I'm polyhouserous or whatever you want to call it. But there is, a lot of people use whole sign houses. It works so well, and you're one of the very small group of people that is like, no, we should be using quadrant sign house systems. And I really love that you have that opinion on that because I just love opinions that challenge things that make me actually have to think more about why I'm doing something. And so I know you have a lot
sometimes I think if everybody agreed with me, what would I do?
Right? You gotta argue.
What would I do with myself?
Why do you? And I'm assuming too that you have rubbed shoulders with whole sign houses in terms of like playing with it. But like, why have you stuck with because I'm going to have Cameron Allen on here, and I think he uses periphery, and I'm going to ask him the same question of like, why do you use this house system, and what about it specifically works for you versus periphery or Placidus?
Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple different types of house systems. If you are listening to this and want to learn the astronomy of this, there's a course launching soon, like within weeks, at the STA Astrology
and
for
the
Astronomer.
STA is the
School of Traditional
School
Astrology.
of Traditional Astrology.
Yeah, so the website is sta.co, sta.com. So there are a couple of different house systems. The one that and methods of creating house systems, the ones that I really find great favor with personally are the ones that keep the midheaven associated with the 10th house and keep the ascendant associated with the first house.
Wait, there's house systems that don't associate the ascendant with the first house?
Yes, sir.
Ow,
I
don't want to know that information.
And I don't know that they were meant to be seriously used. Morinus talks about this, but he makes the point that look at how ridiculous it is for this to be. But at any rate, the thing is that the 10th house, it's about honor, glory, success. And sure, it might be in the 9th sign or the 11th sign, whatever, that's fine. But the 10th house itself, so I use a Regiomontanus system. So what this means is two things. It is a division of the sky using the local meridian. So this is the point that runs from north to south and passes right overhead. And it's going to be taking a look at divisions of the celestial equator and then projecting that back onto the ecliptic. Okay, so I know it's a little bit tough to kind of visualize.
Yeah, I'm already lost.
But anyway, okay, so listen. So there's a couple different systems. They're the ones that just make direct division of the ecliptic, okay? And what they do is they just say, like equal houses, the ascendant is 25, okay, so every cusp is 25.
Yeah.
That's just a direct division of the ecliptic. It doesn't take into account what's the sky looked like, okay?
Yes, well, and that's my biggest gripe with, and my clients know this because I've said this before in my readings, like, well, I use whole sign houses. I love it. My gripe with it is that it's not an accurate depiction of the sky, and there's something about that to me that bothers me. But there's something to me that I like about it because whole sign house is much more symbolic, and I do like that on one level. But yeah, my gripe with it really is not being an exact replication of the sky, which is so important.
Yeah, and okay, so here's where I would kind of push back. I mean, I think the issue is that we have two other systems within the quadrant world. Technically, there is an ecliptic division system that's porphyry. You've mentioned this. Yeah, I didn't know Cameron Allen used it, but that's just...
I'm pretty sure he uses periphery, but I might be wrong.
Okay, so that's just taking the distance between the ascendant and the midheaven and equally dividing it and plotting your house cusp that way. Okay, that's all that is. But the problem is that doesn't create a fixed amount of space. I mean, sometimes that could be like this and then like this tomorrow, or at different hours of the day, it will continually change. I am of the mind, following the guidance that's set down by the first person we have to go on record about houses, Manilius, that what's going on is actually that this is a terrestrial system. Sorry, it is connected to the Earth. It is not a celestial system. The zodiacal circle, the ecliptic, that's out there.
Yeah.
Houses is the one place, the only place where we can actually map local space. And the second you choose not to do that, you lose that information forever. There's nowhere to get that information back. So there are, Placidus, for instance, is a time-based system. Instead of dividing, equal chunks of the sky, okay, Placidus will take equal chunks of time about how long it takes for things to move.
Planetary hours, right?
Yes, and it's got a connection with planetary hours, absolutely. So there are different house systems that have their own logic. My personal logic is that with the terrestrial-based systems, this is about the Earth-based system. It's about the rotation of the Earth and how things appear to move through what Manilius called the temples, which Deborah wrote her.
Right, yeah, you've referenced a few books I have right here.
Of the Sky. Yes, I know. A great library behind me. And so, I think the issue really that needs to be kind of determined, I think there's a no-brainer that we've got to use quadrant systems. We need to keep the midheaven associated with the 10th house cusp and the ascendant with the ascendant cusp. The question is what we do with the intermediate places. I like the space thing. That makes sense to me. My issue with things like whole sign houses is that when we're talking about terrestrial systems, we are demarcating a system that is built on primary motion.
Yeah.
Are you following me?
Yeah.
So the sun rises.
So explain primary versus secondary motion.
And I'm about to. So primary motion is what happens in a 24-hour period. The sun rises, it culminates, it sets, it anti-culminates. And the houses take their meaning from the sun's passage. I mean, it's a very old Egyptian mythology that's associated with Amun-Ra, born as a baby, king, old man,
it's so easy.
underwear. It's all, that's what it is. We're mapping a reality on the earth, okay, using systems of primary motion. That's what we're talking about. The ecliptic is secondary motion. That is a lunar system when we talk about lunar phase. That is all shown through zodiacal degree.
So let me also just point this out for people. So
secondary motion
so this primary motion is the sun and the planets moving throughout the houses, versus secondary motion is the planets moving throughout the zodiac going counterclockwise.
That's exactly right. And it isn't appropriate to use a measurement of secondary motion for a system that is about primary motion. So so the ecliptic measurement, it's inappropriate. But also with whole sign houses, there's a problem. If you take a look, set a chart for London, August 19th, I think I chose 2020. You should see that the moon is at 20. If you go August 19th, I believe it's 2020, in London, 8:15 a.m., you should have Libra rising, and the moon, if you did whole sign houses, the moon would be in the 12th house. Now, the 12th house is associated with imprisonment, undoing, weakness, hospitalization, being powerless. But what happens after a planet moves out of the 12th is it moves
into the first,
into the 11th. No,
oh,
the
my
other
bad.
way.
Yeah,
Right, by primary motion. So that's why the 11th house is associated with freedom and with release. So if you step that chart forward, what ends up happening is, the moon will go from the 12th house, then the ascendant will change. And what will happen is then the moon will move from the 12th into the 11th, okay? So this is what happens with whole sign houses. But the issue is if the moon is at 29 degrees of a sign, anytime a planet changes signs, this happens, you go backwards in the house system. So if the moon, so say you got Libra rising, okay, and the moon is, what's before Libra?
A Virgo, I know.
Yeah, Virgo, 29 Virgo, okay? So now you've got the moon at the tail end of Virgo. And that's a 12th house moon. As soon as Scorpio comes onto the ascendant, where's the moon? In the 11th, right? Because it's just been shifted up. That makes sense. That is primary motion. We're fine so far. The issue is as soon as the moon changes sign and the ascendant hasn't yet changed, because it won't. The ascendant will take 2 hours before it changes.
Yeah.
The planet will change. The moon changes signs. Mercury changes signs. Venus changes signs. Every time they go backward a house. The moon goes back into the 12th.
So it goes against
gets
rid of
primary motion.
Yeah, wow. That's
super inappropriate.
That's a really good point.
And I think it's hard. And people will say things, well, the Indians use whole sign houses. And I don't know anything about Indian astrology, but I know that in Indian culture, it's much more lunar.
They're doing way more other things than just whole sign houses.
Their calendars are centered on the moon. Their festivals are centered on the moon. There is an elevated position for the moon, the moon's nodes. The nodes are risen to a level of prominence that in the West we have not quite acknowledged or come around to, because we are solar system. Okay, but you take my point. I think that it's nowhere near what India's got going with those two. Okay, but then also when we talk about these, systems, even in India, they displace the sun even further because their system is so lunar. They even displace the location of the zodiacal degrees, and they displace it from the sun's motion. In the West, we use, in the tropical zodiac, it's about the sun's motion. It enters into...
That speaks so much to the cultural level of society, too.
Okay, and there is a whole conversation to be had there, but what I'm saying is that the Western system, there is a distinction between primary motion and how we demarcate houses, and that the system needs to adhere. A planet cannot go from the 11th to the 12th. The second that happens, your house system no longer follows the base expectations of a house system. It doesn't qualify as one. So we can talk about the historical argument about whether that was actually ever a thing, and I don't like going there because that always gets ugly. My reading of the text doesn't require there being a whole house system, and that's all I've got to say.
So my question then is, why... you might have just answered this, but then I got it lost. But why periphery then?
Oh, Regiomontanus.
Regiomontanus.
The reason for me is because I like the idea that the houses are fixed in the sky. There is a fixed portion of the earth that does not move.
And how wide are the degrees for the Regiomontanus?
When you say how wide the degrees are,
well, like you said, if the houses are fixed, what do you mean by that?
Yes, because the midheaven doesn't move, right?
So the midheaven
and the ascendants in the east and in the south.
So what you're saying is, for example, my midheaven and my whole sign house chart is 18 Libra. That would be that would be different.
But forget about your birth chart. No. What I'm sorry, I forgot about the mic. What I'm saying is that when you stand outside, the midheaven will always be in the same place. It's south. It's where the meridian intersects with the ecliptic. That point doesn't move. That point doesn't move. Same thing going on with the ascendant. I mean, the ascendant does move a little bit, but it moves like north or south, not like,
and like in the whole sense, you get over here and over
there.
there.
But the point is that these points are fixed. So you can divide the chunks of space between them as fixed chunks of space too, but it depends on how you divide it. Campanists, they will divide the prime vertical, which is the circle that runs overhead. This was a system that Rudyard liked because it really emphasized the individual.
Yeah,
he loved it for psychoanalysis. He said,
I think he said something like, everything.
It yields fabulous results, or I'm very happy with the results, or something like this. So he was a fan of that. But the problem is there's a lot of distortion when you get to the latitudes, or higher latitudes, because it's an entirely observer-based system. I like the one, and this is Johann Mueller, who created the tables for Regiomontanus houses, even though we have evidence that they existed before him. It bears his name. He kind of made the decision we shouldn't be dividing off of the prime vertical because this is a system of primary motion, and we should be using a great circle to cut through, to divide the even portions of space that connect with the Earth's rotation, and so he chose the equator.
Oh, wow, okay.
Okay, so he's trying to say we need to stick with primary motion. So that's why I like it, because it maintains space. Placidus, it doesn't quite do that because it does it about time. So it does a different type of relationship. It's fine, but once you collapse, you can get time anywhere.
Well,
time, as astrologers, we have a million ways to measure time.
Yeah.
We do not actually have a whole lot of ways of mapping space. So personally, I do believe that Regiomontanus has a bit of an edge on the others, although if you use a quadrant house system, you'll never hear a complaint from me.
Well, and I think that's the craziest.
Complaints from me.
In my opinion, astrology, there's a lot of crazy things about astrology, but the craziest part is the houses. When you really get down into it.
Well, and some astrologers thought they were far too superstitious and didn't want to talk about them at all. I mean, Ptolemy outlines a system that looks. I
fucking love reading Ptolemy. He has so many hot takes. He'd be doing so good on Twitter.
Well, he wouldn't be on Twitter probably. I mean, I think he would be too busy. That man was, setting a standard that wouldn't be broken for almost 1,600 years.
Yeah.
It was that's the thing. The heliocentric model had
Think about how many great astrologers are alive right now wasting their time on Twitter.
The call's coming from inside the house.
I know.
So, anyway.
I thought you were going to go more off.
Probably more. I was going to say something, I think, about how Ptolemy, he just liked to try and see if he could pull back some of the superstitious elements while also not recognizing that some other things he said are...
Well, that's what because when I was reading Ptolemy, he's like, I don't believe in houses, but the planets in different parts of the sky matter. And I'm like, so you believe in houses?
Yes, he recognizes that there is a pattern of angularity and cadency, but he's not sure that we need to make any distinction between have you risen or have you come off the angle.
And in my actually, I talked about this. I have a little basic course that I do, and I talk about this in my course of looking at the angles as for example, kind of points where it kind of swoops down and goes up, and swoops down and goes up, swoops down and goes up.
Good. That's wonderful because
it's kind of like the prominence of a planet.
Well, what happens is when we think quadrants, we really think 12th, 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th. The reality is the quadrants actually go 11, 10, 9.
Yeah.
11 is moving to 10, and 10's the big deal, and then 9 is the death that comes after. It's the cadency. It's the falling away. Cadent comes from the same root as cadaver, fallen. That's the idea. So in Horary, for instance, if there was a lot of emphasis on cadent houses, that might suggest that a missing object has fallen, and that's how it came to be lost, because those houses are associated with declining from an angle or position of strength.
And when I started learning about cadent houses, that really changed my opinion on all of it, because it just makes so much more sense about literally things being hidden, things being more tucked away, and the idea of kind of something being prominent. And it's interesting too because I guess when you first get into astrology, you're just worried about the house meanings. You're not necessarily worried about primary motion. Versus, I feel like if we taught astrology from the point
of we taught it the way it probably ought to be taught, a serious subject that requires a clear understanding of astronomy. I didn't realize, I think, when I first started, how important it was to have a good basis on astronomy, because there's a lot of very easily correctable ideas if you understood what was really happening in the sky at the time that you're proposing this particular model or way of thinking. But we've also there's never been a time where astrology didn't have work to do, and maybe bringing better astronomical education into the center of our everyday discussions about astrology is pretty important.
It's a hardcore plug into the ST astronomy course.
Yes. But also I do mean it sincerely. That's why I worked on it.
I mean, me and my buddy are actually working on a book about the astrology of Mars, because that's eventually going to be a thing.
That is so great. I should actually, I saw online, that there was a dude who was trying to build an astrology of Mars, from Mars, the position of Mars, and I was in correspondence with him at one stage because I really loved. He wasn't an astrologer; he was an astronomer, and he was building.
My buddy's an astronomer, and this is all we talk about because the thing is on Mars, this is where it really comes down to is time zones.
Yeah.
You cannot establish any astrology on Mars until there are time zones because until you can get the timing right, and then that goes into the whole.
Well, you don't need time zones. All you need is longitude and latitude. So if you can create a fixed point of reference, you can actually
that's another question of the fixed point of reference too, as far as like
you'd have to establish it's arbitrary. The only reason that 0 degrees of longitude runs through Greenwich is because of British Empire. That is it. Well, and by the time that maps proliferated around the world, and it was time for us to, we had train schedules now where we needed before. The steam train, we really didn't need to actually standardize time from one town to the next because as far as you're concerned, it's either noon or it's not. You know, but now we've got trains arriving somewhere and we need to get timetables established. We had to standardize something. Then you start introducing.
I have a history of time zones right there. It's one of the, I made a tweet about it because right under the Astrodata 5 on the 3rd, right there. So it's so crazy because, I've had to do so much.
By Doris Doan. Oh, thank you, Doris. This is an AFA publication. It's beautiful.
It's such
really
a big.
So then all you need is longitude. So you would have to create something arbitrary.
Well, and to go back to the astronomy part of it is for example, so much. Something I heard that is one of my favorite things to say is everything means what it means in astrology because of what it is, and this for example, it's very easy to figure out what these planets mean if you just kind of look at them simply, and if once you understand the astronomy of it, it all starts to really unfold to understand
all astrology
the metaphysics of it.
Yeah, I would really be interested if somebody could improve upon the conciseness of this definition. But astrology is just the study of motion and light and the meaning of motion and light. When you take down literally everything we do, the only thing that is ever being discussed is brilliance and motion.
Yeah.
That's
and I've heard it as also to the divination of measurement, which is something I like to subscribe.
I like that too. That's beautiful. I read that somewhere a few years ago and I had forgotten. Thank you for saying that out loud. I love that.
Well, that's the way I really look at it too, because it's
and this is part of what, it's a mercurial art. I remember when I first started coming up in astrology thinking it's so silly that we say that astrology is a mercurial art.
Oh, it's so mercurial. When people are like, it's Uranus. No, it's mercurial.
And also, we can't ever stop arguing about what systems to use, what techniques to use. It's it's just part of our culture as well. So that's a very
and it's also interesting
thing.
too that I've been getting so much more into, since my followers know that I've been getting into the carnivore stuff and getting into the history of that, and the fact that most written language comes from trading bushels of wheat from to other people, and we had to develop language in order and calculations, which is, and this is also happening around the same time. Astrology is taking off at the same time, right?
Yeah.
God, so what was your, we're an hour and 11 minutes here. I'll wrap it up with a few more questions.
Sure,
get you out of here.
Yeah, thank you. Also, just thank you for having me. This has been really nice. We met so long ago, but your energy was immediately so fun to be around.
Well, so 2018 was fucking fun. That was literally one of the funnest things ever.
Because in my head, you're like pop rocks, It's like that's the thing. So you never have a bad time with pop rocks, I don't think.
I love to hear that. I think other people might disagree with that, but
they can get over it.
And I'm glad that you came too, because for me, I really want to have more in-person meetups. I can't afford to fly people out and get that system going yet, but if I can snag as many people as I can and have sit-down conversations.
Yeah, he's harvesting from the conference.
Yeah, I'm literally going to be going like this for the next little while, depending if I can get it. But in my opinion, I can't do Zoom. I can't do Zoom anymore with because there's something that has to be in person, and also too something I really wanted to talk to you about is I know that me and you can have a sit down this isn't we're just gonna sit here and teach you something. This is me and you, two astrologers, talking fucking shop.
Continuing the conversation we were having in
the car. Essentially, pretty much. Yeah. And this is where I think people really want to gain more out of astrology. Is for me, I learn the most when I'm absorbing around the people that I look up to, around me. Where I'm when I hear two experts that I want to know more about talking, I shut the fuck up and I listen. And I think when you can just kind of immerse yourself in that language and that dialogue, and what that really takes is people just chatting what's your opinion about signs? Well, what are you doing with this? And it allows for that conversation. I'm super happy that you got to come here for this. But I guess the end. What was you said you're doing a workshop yesterday.
I did a
what's
workshop
the last
yesterday.
one you're doing? It's something about the heart of the chart or something.
That's
like that.
the one where I was talking about the.
It's the heart of the card.
The heart of the the heart of consultation. So that's where I'm using the consultation chart and the birth chart and talking about that bridal shower story, and that's the one.
Oh, so then your other one was about elections.
Today, so yesterday there was one on electional astrology and how to get that right.
So, how do you tell us? How do you get it right?
You gotta You got to plug it into the birth chart. I mean, the most important point I can make is it doesn't matter how beautiful your election is. You know, you can have Jupiter on the midheaven, waxing trine between the sun and moon, reception happening every which way, Venus on an angle, and that is great. If you can find something that's like that beautiful, sure, operate under that moment. And, you know, but the thing is, if it doesn't connect to your birth chart, then what you've done is you found a really good moment for someone else. If you want to do so, you take a look at these historical texts about electional astrology, and they're very clear that if you want to do it right, you have got to actually make the election an extrapolation. It's got to have, it's like roots of a plant. It has to be in some soil. It has to draw power from something. It's a talisman in a way. You are the talisman that it draws power from. It's a talismanic exchange. That moment needs to be fed from some source. And if you don't give it a source, it will find one. So it will pull from somebody else, and somebody else who has better astrology and better connections to that moment will be the ones to take advantage of that. So the thing is, if you want to elect and do it well, the first and last thing you consider is, with respect to the birth chart, what are the transits looking like? Then the astrology, and that's what they'll say in the beginning. And this is the part that I feel, honestly, like it's all too easy to skip over because it feels like preamble. It feels like you're being preached to. It feels like the philosophical part. You know, get me to the rules. You know, I just want to get to the meat of it so I can go, you know, try it out and, you know, whatever. But that beginning part sets the stage for everything else, because the rest of the techniques, you're meant to try and see how much of that you can fit in while getting this first part right. That's more important than making sure you've got every configuration that we talk about in a potential property sale, business transaction. Truth is, you can have none of that, but if you've got the midheaven on this person's natal sun, their natal Jupiter's on the second cusp, the moon's applying, you know, to a happy aspect to the ascendant ruler, which happens to be on their natal Jupiter or 11th cusp, or, you know, somewhere else that is favorable and inclines that person towards success. That's the job.
Rooting, and I guess a question for you would be like, how often do you see people like elect something that's not rooted in their chart?
It's frequent. I mean, you can pick up a lot of astrological magazines, and there's just in the back like list of elections for the next 2-3 months. For whom? You know, it's an interesting exercise. You know, I mean, I think it's good as a teaching tool to say this is a nice symbol for this type of activity, but we shouldn't be encouraging people to just pick that up. I mean, I once had this conversation with somebody who made a Venus talisman, and the chart was dismal for its own reasons, but this person got this Venus talisman and then noticed that there was all this adverse health effects that were going on around them that didn't really seem, of course they were Venusian in nature, they had Venus related themes, kidney stuff and, you know, all that kind of jazz, throat stuff as well, if I remember. I mean, there was a rash that developed, and, you know, it was interesting stuff. But when you take a look at the talisman's creation date, the moon was an exact opposition to this person's natal Mars in the 6th house. Oh. So they kicked this thing. So if you're not paying attention, if we really believe all things are connected, then take that shit to the bank and mean it. You know, you can't just introduce a free radical to somebody that's got not, you know, that's going to fuck shit up.
Well, and I think that's also the hardest part too, is like astrology can be so, I get the sides of the brain messed up. It's left brain where it's like very science oriented.
Sure.
Right? I always get
question for Google.
Yeah. Well, so it's like one of those things where it's very that side of the brain, but we forget that like it is so much more. It's like, and
honestly,
your soul.
Astrology gets so much easier when you embrace this. It's because it's just so much more organic, and it's not this rules-based thing. It's about understanding systems and techniques and what's reliable, and that's it. You know, it's.
So I guess to close, I feel like I've kind of you answered all of my questions. I don't have much to ask you anymore.
How are you feeling about the upcoming Mars retrograde?
Oh, you mean Mars being in my 7th house for? Well,
is that right?
It's 6th house if we're going to be doing your system, but 7th house whole sign houses. Either way,
wow.
I'm going to be very stimulated. I'm working on an album right now, and so it's my 5th.
Wicked. That is super cool.
It's taken like 2 years. It all started during the Mars retrograde in Aries, and that was a fucking.
So it's time we're bringing it back.
Yeah,
that's great.
So we're bringing it back. Jupiter, like my Saturn in Aries is activated right now. Jupiter's on it, so it's all the 5th house stuff. But I'm looking. I don't know what to say about the Mars retrograde in Gemini. I'm actually talking to S.J. Anderson about this here in a couple days about it, because he did a really good video about it. You should check it out. But
yeah, I should. I love watching S.J. stuff.
Yeah, he's a great.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah, he's absolutely incredible.
Salt of the earth kind of guy. You know?
Yeah, and I guess like the only thing I'm looking forward to is like I think the conversations, like Mars is going to square Neptune, and it just sounds like a lot. It's just arguing with data. I feel like I made a tweet of like Mars in Gemini is going to be just like Rahu in Gemini. It's just like here's the data and arguing about it all day long.
Okay.
But the fact that it's trining Saturn, and then they both simultaneously ingress into Cancer and Pisces at the same time, where there's this like still like reception between them.
Yes, and there's anytime we've got Saturn moving into the Jupiter ruled signs, we also get this mess about border stuff issue that comes up.
I've been talking. I'm so glad you brought this up. I've been hounding people. 1965 immigration, or 1964 or 1965 Immigration Act. 1994 the ratification to the Immigration Act.
Well, so that's Pisces, but if you take a look at Sagittarius too, migrant crises and things like this. I mean, when Saturn's in Jupiter sign, you get these nasty, kind of fights about what walls need to look like. And
so here's a question for you, and this might even get a little bit too like in dicey territory, but like I have Pluto's ingressing into Aquarius at the same time Saturn's ingressing into Pisces, and in my opinion, like I think the most cataclysmic version of it is like maybe like again new disease, more lockdowns, but it's border related. Like it's straight up closing borders there for a minute and being very specific about who we let in and who let out.
That would be interesting. Pluto's passages through Aquarius has historically been associated with times of more open borders, and so like in the 1500s, was it 1500s, 1200s?
The open borders of the Mongolian Empire.
I think it's Alfonso. If you research the Toledo School of Translators and take a look at what's going on towards the end of the Islamic Golden Era, there was a desire at this stage. There was a fall away after about 600 AD, where we weren't, the Greek Empire had really stayed alive in its translations through the Roman Empire. But when the Roman Empire collapsed, it didn't really become in vogue to be moving things between Greek and Latin. And after a while, a couple centuries, we start losing translations that we used to have access to. We don't have these things. When we then get into the period of the Islamic Golden Age, we're starting to see the rebuilding of libraries and things moving back into Greek and Latin and all this stuff. But when we get then to the 13th century, now we're moving to space, and this is where Pluto was in Aquarius previously, where we are beginning to try to standardize language. And so we saw Spanish, Old Castilian, become the language. King Alfonso of Castile was trying to make sure that universities were equal. This is Wendy Stacy has provided a lot of research on this, but I recently had the opportunity to talk about an important translator in that period, John of Seville. And so I'm a little more aware of this as a result of some of these things that I've gotten to do over both because of my astrological mothers, Deborah and Wendy, so in that respect. But at any rate, I mean, it was about democratization of universities and opening borders and making language more. So it'll be interesting to see.
Well, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius was when the Constitution was formed.
Say it again.
Saturn-Pluto in Aquarius was the Constitution, which I mean, I can't look at Aquarius without looking at like the tech dystopia that is falling upon us here soon, and the idea of and the idea of like I've been getting it. The conspiracy world I've been getting to, like Alison McDowell, she goes a lot into like what the white settlers were doing, were introducing a new way of life to the Native Americans, essentially being like
that's one way to word it.
Well, and it came with like Pluto and Aquarius of like kind of two-tiered society, us versus them, and there was an ideological difference in there. And I've been getting a lot into Native American history with Aquarius. It's actually really fucking crazy.
Yeah, I could quite imagine.
I guess I look at
because those were not good years to be Native.
No, they were. Well, you want to know what's crazy? This is what I've been getting into. So in 1873 was when the buffalo were pretty much extinct.
I just want to correct what I said. It's always a good year to be Native, but there was. Sorry, that came out. Yeah,
I don't think anyone would strip it on it. But
I didn't mean it that way. But we didn't make it easy,
Well, we literally committed. I mean, like in California, you can get money from the state and the government for bringing in an Indian scout. We committed a genocide essentially. But the way that we did that was we made the buffalo go extinct, which was when the buffalo finally went extinct, it was Saturn in Aquarius squaring Neptune and Taurus.
Well, and you have a point because we are now
Taurus.
Moving towards a situation where we've got massive drought, we have animal die-off, coral reef die-off. We've got people who
governments
are
also
big money buying up huge farm estate. Like, what's that about? Why is Bill Gates investing in all this farmland?
Well, at the same time, in the middle of a food crisis, they're going, you need to actually cut your production of beef and get rid of your cows for nitrogen emissions because we care about that all of a sudden, even though most of the population is also fed off beef.
I will do my best to not touch that, but I think there's...
Wait, aren't you vegan?
No, God, no. I'm not
or vegetarian.
It's very polite. No, I'm sure I was at some stage. I have been on and off.
I feel like I've
so
heard you
many
say that
times.
before or something like
well,
that.
I've been on and off it many times. I'm sure that at some stage we knew each other, and I was, and like a normal vegetarian, I would have been loud about it. Everybody would have known. So,
but well. Shit, I mean, we can probably go into that wormhole forever, but I don't want to take up any more of your time. We've already had not 120 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. Anyway, Wade, where can people find you? Where can people, what do you want people to know? Plug
wadecaves.com is my website. I'll be honest, the events part, I don't always keep it updated, but I do have a newsletter. I will always let people know what's going on. I send a lot of really fun stuff through the newsletter, so you can sign up for that at the bottom of my website, wadecaves.com. Scroll down. I teach at the School of Traditional Astrology. It was founded by Deborah Holding in 1996. We started with a horary curriculum.
I'm as old as the STA.
See what I mean?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's crazy. And, we started with a curriculum in horary and have since expanded to Lee Lehman offering medical astrology. Nina Griffin is offering a course on magical elections and talismanic work. I'm launching a course on astronomy. So we're really starting to expand the syllabus, and I think we've got some, really, really world-class educators who are collaborating together to create a good environment for prospective students. So sta.co if you'd like to be in a structured environment with other students of similar interests. It might be a
and
good
it's actually like
go.
a school. I felt like I was literally in a fucking school when
Which is awesome.
when I
That's
did
what
the
we
STA.
want. You want to feel like you've got a cohort, you got classmates, you got assignments, you got time that you got to show up.
No, I was getting the information. I felt like I genuinely felt it was very worth my dollar taking the STA for everything that came in. And also as a professional astrologer that's done courses, I can see like this is so much work.
Deborah Holding has been developing this for almost 3 decades, and hats off. I mean, she has developed a world-class quality speaks for itself, so I didn't want to gas it up too much, but it's just hats off to her and her creative effort. So.
Well, sweet. Wade, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you having on here, and I guess everyone, we will be seeing you next time.